I'm Emily Mashak, and you're listening to Tuned Into NoCo, Town Square Media's show that lets you know what matters in NoCo. I'm talking today with Suzanne Janssen, the public art manager for the city of Loveland, and Jane DeDecker, an artist who recently created a sculpture, Every Word We Utter, that was dedicated at the Loveland Civic Center. I am so excited to talk about the sculpture and Loveland's public arts program today. But before we get into all that, I'd love to learn a little bit about each of you. I'll start with you, Jane. What inspired you to become an artist?
Oh my gosh. My mother was artistic, grew up on a farm in Iowa, and she went to the Art Institute of Chicago as a young girl and ended up being called back home to help her family on the farm in Iowa. And she had always, included art in our everyday life. So I knew as a young age, I just wanted to be an artist because I had spent, learning to draw as a young girl. And I just knew I wanted to be an artist. I had no idea, though, I wanted to be a sculptor. I went through college and studied art, but never sculpture. And it was a sculpting instructor there that said, "Janie, I think you're a sculptor." I said, "Oh my gosh, I don't think so." So here I am, 38 years sculpting now. I can't believe that. But I really, I think one of my favorite parts about sculpting is doing so many public pieces and working with committees and being a voice for a community. I had no idea that would be like a facet of sculpture that I just really, truly love.
That is awesome. And how about you, Suzanne? How did you come to be Loveland's public art manager?
Well, I came to work for the city of Loveland back in 2000, actually. And there was a position that opened up at the museum, and the Cultural Services Department oversees the museum, public art, and theater. And I love all three of those. So I applied for the position and was hired as the business services coordinator. And then I took over the duties for public art, and I have been the public art manager since 2007, and I just love it. I absolutely love working with our local artists as well as national artists and supporting them in their artistic endeavors. And I love working for the city. I think the city's support for art is tremendous. And I have worked for two other municipalities, and I will say that Loveland is by far what's the right word that I can say here? It's by far the most dedicated city I have seen to supporting art in a very real way. And I think that's because of our 1% for the Arts program. So, it's a joy. Every day at work is different, and that's what I love about it.
Well, that is great. And speaking of the city's commitment to art, there was recently a version of Every Word We Utter, your sculpture, Jane, dedicated at the Loveland Civic Center. Now, I know that it's about women's suffrage. We're hoping to get one in Washington, D.C., I believe. What do our listeners need to know about your sculpture, Jane? Tell us a little bit more about it.
It celebrates the centennial of the 19th Amendment, but I think that it goes beyond. There's a lack of representation of women in sculpture nationally, and this is an opportunity to not only kind of fill that gap, but also really just tell the story about women's history. It's, the concept may change as it moves to Washington, D.C. We have a lot of steps to go through as far as getting it placed there, but this initial concept and the bill is written around women's suffrage, which is when we had our National Capital Memorial Advisory meeting, as sort of the group that works to put the national monuments in Washington, D.C., they felt like this was something that was sorely lacking in their in the landscape of the memorials in Washington, D.C., was something that described the women's vote.
And now, correct me if I'm wrong, but this version of the sculpture that we have in Loveland, it also has an inscription from a Loveland poet on it. Is that right?
It's a poem that was written by Veronica Patterson in response to seeing a smaller version of the sculpture in a wonderful show that the museum put together for the women's vote.
It was called Vote a Centennial Celebration. Yep, and it was coordinated by Women in the Vote, which is a Loveland group of artists who got together to form that, and it was hosted by the Loveland Museum.
It was written in response. Veronica wrote it in response to the sculpture, and I cry every time I read it. I just think it shows the strength of the women and just the tenacity and the depth. It's just an amazing poem, and I think the two together really tell a story. I feel like, especially I think when you see poetry and sculpture together, people can take away certain parts. I mean, I think we all see things and experience things differently, and to have that dual sort of imagery and the written word, I think you can just it kind of puts a really beautiful picture together of women's suffrage.
Yeah, well, it's so amazing to hear how the sculpture is connected to Loveland. And I know that the dedication was part of Loveland's Art in Public Places program. Suzanne, can you tell me more about that program and what it does for the city?
I'd be happy to. So the history of Loveland's public art program is really tied directly to the bronze foundries in Loveland. And that was back in 1984, where a group of like-minded individuals got together and they decided it would be great to host an outdoor sculpture show. And they were going to call it Sculpture in the Park. And that show was an immediate success. And because of that, two significant things happened. The first of which is the Loveland High Plains Arts Council was formed. And that is a private arts organization that continues to thrive. It is a nonprofit organization, and it produces the annual Sculpture in the Park show every August. So I'm hoping many of your visitors have been there in the past. The other is that the Loveland's mayor at the time, he pushed forward an effort to develop a public art program for the city. And he pushed forward, and it was adopted by the city, a 1% for the arts ordinance. And Loveland became the first municipality to adopt a 1% for the arts ordinance. And what that means, and the significance of that, is that 1% of all city capital projects that are valued at $50,000 or more is placed into the Art in Public Places Fund. And that fund is used to acquire, display, and also maintain public art within the city. And that is, the 1% is really a significant contribution and has been a really key asset to the city as far as building the public art program.
Could you expand on that a little more about what the city's art collection looks like now? What are the works like in there? How are they acquired? How does this all work?
Sure. The Art in Public Places collection is, right now, we have 542 individual works of art. And of those, 334 of those artworks are sculpture, and 208 are two-dimensional artworks. So that would be paintings, mixed media artworks, photography. And the art is displayed within the city right-of-way. So right now we have 400 outdoor works of art. And that certainly keeps an art presence at the forefront of both our residents and our visitors alike. And then we have 142 pieces that are placed within city buildings. And they're acquired through a number of different ways. Direct purchases is very similar to how we purchased every word we utter for the city. And that is, often we will be approached or we will see a sculpture that we would like to purchase. And so the city moves forward and does a direct purchase from the artist. Another way, and this is the most the way most of our collection has actually been acquired, and that is through donations. So donations make up 68% of our collections, and that has been donated by private art organizations, the largest of which is the Loveland High Plains Arts Council, as well as artists and private donors. And I really am not aware of another city that has 68% of their collection donated. It's a pretty unusual occurrence. We also have open competitions, and those will often happen when we have either new construction happening through buildings or new roadways or new bridges. We'll often do open competitions where we have a formal process where artists will submit essentially their resumes and portfolio, and then we normally will narrow that down to 3 artists who then develop a concept, and that is voted on by the Visual Arts Commission, which is our governing board.
That is so cool. And now I know, like we said, every word we utter is part of the collection. But Jane, do you have more pieces in the Loveland collection? And would you just be able to give me a general insight as to what else you're working on?
I have quite a few pieces, honorably so, in the collection. 3, I think, that were donated by the High Plains Art Council. 3 that are donated by private donors. So I think there's 7 public pieces here in Loveland. I am completely amazed by the amount of support that we get from volunteers and donors in Loveland. Everyone has embraced the art in our city.
Yeah, and going off of that, I know we also have a sculpture quest in the works for Loveland. What's going on with that? What do our listeners need to know?
So the Sculpture Quest is a great way to tour the 4 sculpture gardens that we have in Loveland, and you are going to see 3 of Jane's pieces featured in that scavenger hunt. So what this is it's a scavenger hunt that is available for free through a mobile app called Event Z. So that's the word event and then ZEE at the end of that. And people can download that on their phone. And it's really a journey through Loveland's public art with a real specific focus on sculpture. So the sculpture towns, the sculpture parks that you are going to be visiting are the Chipunga Sculpture Park at Centera, which is a beautiful display of Shona sculpture. And you will not find any other sculpture garden like this in the United States, guaranteed. Then we have also 3, and that the Sculpture Park at Centera, they have a beautiful website that shows you also all of the artwork, and they have profiles on the artists as well. The city owns 3 sculpture gardens in town. So the Benson Sculpture Garden, which has expanded recently over to North Lake Park. So there are essentially 2 sides to Benson Park now, on the north and the south side of 29th Street. We also have the McWhinney-Hahn Sculpture Garden at the Visitors Center, and we have a sculpture collection out at the Civic Center, which is where the Chilson Recreation Center, the library, and City Hall are. And all of that is around a beautiful location at the Foot Lagoon. So the fun thing about this scavenger hunt is that it's very fun. It's a great family activity, and it's a wonderful way to explore the diversity of the artwork on display within Loveland. And we provide little bits of information about each of the locations and the artists and the artwork featured. And really, it's a great opportunity to just interact with the artwork and sort of share the love about, Loveland's public art program. It's quite fun, and there are amazing prizes that you can win. So the contest started on August 13th and it ends on November 12th. So if people have not participated, I really encourage you to get out and enjoy the fall with the weather being a little bit cooler and see all that Loveland has to offer within our sculpture gardens.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, both of you, Jane, for giving us insight into your sculpture, and Suzanne for sharing a little bit about Loveland's arts program. Is there anything else that you feel like we missed or that you would like listeners to know?
Well, Jane, if you don't mind, I just want to jump in and let people know that we do have a new website. It is lovelandpublicart.org, where you can go on. And if you're an artist, we do have open calls. We are looking for sculpture to display next spring. So we're starting that search now. That is for the TAP 3D program. We also have the TAP 2D program, which is for artists who create two-dimensional artwork. That artwork will be on display from February to February, starting in 2022. And we're also looking for 2 muralists that can help us not only fabricate murals in town, but also there is an educational component for the community where they will help participate in the creation of those murals. So feel free to check out the website or feel free to call me, and I'm happy to share that information with you.
Yeah, I think that the city has done an amazing job just building a really diverse, very artistic landscape. It's rich and beautiful, and everyone should see it.
Great. Well, thank you again both so much, ladies. It was awesome to learn about this today.
Thank you very much.
Again, that was Jane DeDecker and Suzanne Janssen talking about public art in Loveland and Jane's sculpture, Every Word We Utter. You can learn more about the sculpture and the art in Loveland at lovelandpublicart.org.